Welcome back. We're looking forward, B'ezras Hashem, to continue on Igeres Chof, Igeres HaKodesh Chof, which is, we did pledge in the very beginning of the study of this very Igeres, this very epistle, that we are going to point out very clearly that this Igeres is distinct, it's different, it's complex, it's nuanced, it's not the regular. And the reason why we do so. So those of you who followed from the very beginning, or the overall followed the classes, understand on their own. You need not to mention this. However, those who are not, they're newcomers. We think about Tanya. We want to relate to Tanya to something a little more accessible, something easier to grasp, and easier to appreciate, easier to understand. And then we come to Igeres HaKodesh, someone opens up new, Igeres HaKodesh, yeah, it's exciting, I'm hearing interesting words and exciting words, even in these classes, this particular Pedic, it's rich, loaded with important information, and we have the opportunity to explain it a bit, again, with the kindness and grace of Hashem. It's only the kindness and grace of Hashem, like everything, but in this case you see it because this is a complex Pedic. And someone, you can appreciate it, but is this the Tanya which we are told time and again to learn it, study it? This will align one with the Ratzon Hashem, and with the Ratzon Elin, with their purpose in life in the most perfect manner possible. In other words, the manual is perfect, and we say this many times. This is the most perfect manual in Avodas Hashem, by far. And again, Chas v'Chalila, not even need to negate or mention, minimizing any of this Musifri Musari, daily Yisraeli, which they stood B'Harei Kodesh, and their words, Yisaydosom B'Harei Kodesh, of course. But the overall message that we gave the other day an example. You have a manual which tells you the most important ideas, and they don't tackle many details, and you could work the machine with that manual. And it's fine, one way or another. But after a while, you realize, had I known this, I would be able to work the machine again from that very device so much more. But I didn't know about that. And the overall things were going, and I fit a certain framework and bracket, and then everything was fine. And so, namely, I'm talking about Avodas Hashem. I'm learning, I'm doing the checklist, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, and so on. But then you learn Tanya. Different idea. You realize Tanya tackles every single detail in the identifies every detail in the structure and the psyche and the whole development and nature of the human being, the human condition, which is what we're dealing with. We have to fuse or bring in Malchus, godliness, into the human dimension. Hashem created us as human beings, not as robots, and fill in every crevice, utilize every faculty, the rich faculties, and the more ongoing faculties are expressed more ongoing, and meaning to say those which we deal with every minute, every second of our life, basically, and those which we have to tap into periodically, deeper faculties which they are deeper in reach and deeper in expression and so on. Every single faculty to be utilized in Avodas Hashem is our mandate. And Tanya deals with every faculty of the human condition, and deals with the human condition, the weaknesses of the human condition, and it brings together a wholesome image, and namely tells us how this is so attainable to us, and ultimately metamorphoses. This is not just a word which is just easily said, but it's the emes. Our whole alignment becomes a person who lives a life of Tanya. He doesn't have to become a tzaddik. Tanya, it's called Sefer Shel Beinani. But what is a Beinani? To have his doctrine, a Beinani, someone never sins ever in his lifetime. How could that be? But let's learn Tanya, and you see how it's all possible without becoming the tzaddik. And a person is able to navigate his Avodas Hashem with joy and gladness of heart, and be able to grow in every area and Torah and mitzvahs, and This is why we want to say describe Tanya succinctly. It's the perfect manual. All details come to light. Nothing is hidden under the carpet, and dealt with, and is able to configure men with their mission, their mandate, and ultimately their creator, of course. So when one knows this about Tanya, all of a sudden he opens the Igeres HaKodesh, and he's meant to know that about Tanya, because that's why it's so encouraging, beyond encouraging. It's vital. It's vital that every Yid learns Tanya, period, point blank. It's the emes. But so when you say a Yid to learn Tanya, and then he opens up Igeres HaKodesh, Chaf, it seems a little more complex and maybe intimidating, and maybe, whoa, I'm not ready for it yet, or whatever. So we established this in the very beginning. Chaf is a distinct Chaf. There's this Igeres Chaf. Yud Tes is a little close, getting us ready for Chaf, if you will. And then there's one similar chapter in Kuntres Achrin, which is the final segment of Tanya. Tanya has 5 segments. It's with precision. We mentioned some Tzedek pointed this out. It's with precision. This is the Teresh Biksav of Teresh Achsidus. So there is a similar chapter in Kuntres Achrin. The rest are much easier to attain, much easier to appreciate, much easier to simply understand, and significantly less complex. This Pedic is deep, say it's nuanced, it's complex. So we give this introduction, and we'll say every single one. It's gonna still be a long ride. I believe this is the 7th class on Igeres HaKodesh Chaf, and it's also it's a lengthier chapter. It's a lengthier Igeres, so it's a long time, and it's going to be a little ride over here. But we're going to point this out every single one. To have heads up, this is of course important to point this out. Also, we always send you back to Igeres HaKodesh Yud. This whole segment, which is the 4th segment in Sefer Tanya, we just indicated, that this segment has its own backdrop. It's different, distinct than the first 3 in many ways. But we had this whole presentation in the beginning of Yud, which is pretty much 10 back. Worthwhile to look there. And then and to find it is wherever you're watching, but the original website always has the advantage, easy to identify all the previous classes. For example, Yud, going back to the beginning of Yud, literally a second, with that, a second, not exaggeration, with the technology today, which is the great bracha of the pre-Maisa Mashiach, as it says in Zayir, 2,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago, pretty much about 2,000 years ago. It's going to be the Yiftachu Shari Chochma from above and from below, in every level. So we have you don't have to rewind and go forward. It's easy to see all the previous classes. In the very beginning of Kuti Amarim, for that matter, which we merited to conclude, the Sheikh Bemun and until the 20th. Again, all these classes are lined up on the original website. Is the easiest way to access these classes, which is tanyaonline.com, tanyaonline.com. So, beginning of Yud, for example, we have that presentation. It's just a click away. And in general, we do cross-reference different ideas, which we learn with, as we know, meaning to say sometimes they're mentioned but elaborative in other areas. So we just say, look at that chapter, but even Kuti Amarim and in Shaykh Bemun and Igeres HaTshuva, and Alter Rebbe himself cross-references, and therefore it's always easy to use this website to find this, which is explained in other areas of Sefer Tanya, Tanya Kadisha, and we do so as well when we want to, when there's certain ideas which are mentioned in a present study, and we send you to this area, to that pedic, which the Alter Rebbe discusses it in length. So that's, again, tanyaonline.com. There's an advantage as well. There's the text is set up in a separate scroll bar, such easy to follow, as we kind of constantly mention. In any case, so we're holding Ukidei 260. Ukidei Shia Yesh Hazen Nivra Bekechet. So last week we explained something which was one of the most fundamental revelations, if you will, of the Alter Rebbe. And For that matter, we did mention this Igeres Chof was written shortly before the Alter Rebbe passed away. And it's interesting, at that point he inserted something extraordinarily telling, and how much it contributes to our Avodas Hashem, to be able to stand with grace and contentment in serving Hashem precisely in this world, in the Ilam Hazeh Gashmi, in the physical world, as opposed to in a spiritual plane, and within the physical world dealing with the physical, which is the significant majority of mitzvahs are performed with the physical of Elam Hazeh, and we should not be deterred on getting involved with those boxes or those crackers, Pesach night and everything. Let me serve Hashem more in a rich way with my intellect and my emotions, and Hashem, I love you, and so on. The details, the physical, the Elam Hazeh, dealing with again Elam Hazeh Gashmi. It's enough I live here, and if I am here, I have to deal with it. This is the way I'm connecting to the Almighty. Yeah, that's the way you're connecting to the Almighty. First of all, we know that because Tanya tells it to us. We need to look further, but here the Alter Rebbe introduces some virtuous dimension of that Dafka Elam Hazeh Gashmi, which in Tanya Kaddish he never mentioned it before. And again, look there, we took an entire class to explain it. And this is connected to the core essence of Hashem. And the only way that the Gashmi could come, different in all areas of the entire Seder Ishtalshul, this order of evolution, nothing has that expression which expresses the core of Hashem like Elam Hazeh Gashmi. Again, you have to see like this, the physicality of Elam Hazeh, which is the makeup of Elam Hazeh. It's Elam Hazeh Gashmi. Again, you can see the previous class. So the Alter Rebbe here, Ukidei, which we're holding at this point, is in order to execute. You know, where it comes from, it's similar to like this great idea was introduced by this brilliant individual, or let's say he has a company, he's the CEO, and he introduces a brilliant idea, which is it would be contributed solely to him. A brilliant person and always an innovator, and innovates some enormous idea, and that itself would bring enormous growth, monetary growth, and ultimately monetary gain to the company, and so on. Does it mean that he himself is there in unfolding all the details of this program? Of course not. He is the initiator. It's all attributed to him. But nonetheless, once he passes on the message, there's a chain of command, and then the chain of implementing this idea. A bunch of people working, and they're knowledgeable on their own, of course. But nonetheless, it's an idea which they come and they execute the idea. But it's all attributed to this CEO, as an example, as his idea, as an example, his or her idea. This is totally attributed to them. The execution comes there's a certain way how it's executed. Now, when it comes to Hashem, everything is Hashem. There's not just the CEO, and he's on every single level, but you can't compare the core of Etzem of Hashem to the lower levels. Even the Eir is an offspring of the Etzem, of the Ein Sof. We explained it last week as well. So the Alter Rebbe says, yes, the Atzmos Mahos, the core of Hashem, is connected to the Davar Gashmi. And the Gashmi is only able to be created through this program of Yesh Me'ayin Ex Nihilo, which is ultimately attributed to the Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the actual execution is what the Alter Rebbe speaks about at this time. Ukedei she'yeh Yesh Hazeh Niha Nivra B'koach Ein Sof, in order that it should actually manifest, it should ultimately come into a state of a Yesh Bal Gvul, with a limitation and border and measurement. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam She'akel Mi'Bidbarei. There's the Nislabish. How did that happen? So Nislabish Ein Sof became Yutzviris Atzilus. So where it comes from, and the only way that it could ever happen, was the koyach of the Atzmus Mahus, Amitis Hametzias, in the Lashon of the Rambam, at the very beginning of Sefer Hamada. But how it's brought to fruition is when this B'koyach Sorry, Nislabish. Went back a line. Nislabish Ein Sof. The Ein Sof invested in the kelim of Yud Tzviris Atzilus, of the 10 Tzviris of Atzilus. Umisyachad b'seichem, and becomes one with them, mitachas yichud, with the ultimate unity. So that Ein Sof, which is an expression and reflection of the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, enters into the kelim of the Yud Tzviris Atzilus, and becomes one with them with the ultimate union, ultimate unity, ad yivagam till Hashem and His kelim are one, which is an expression, famous expression in Kabbalah. Hashem and His Oyreis are one, and Hashem and His kelim are one. We mentioned many times you can't compare the union and the unity of Hashem and the Oyre to Hashem and the kelim. That's why the expression is not Iyu v'chayei v'gamay. There's a divide. Iyu v'chayei and Iyu v'gamay. You can't compare. Of course you can't compare. This is the Oyre. Of course it's much more one with the Ihu, with the Ein Sof, more than the kelim. However, here he's underscoring the garmoi, because you're talking about the kelim, which are meant to produce the finite energy, or the finite result from the Ein Sof, which is ultimately the Halam Hazeh, which begins, the evolution of this begins, of course, in Elam HaBriya. Elam HaBriya is a spiritual world, but still called Briya. We mentioned many times the difference of Briya and Atzilus. It's not just one world under. Atzilus is a world of emanation. Briya is a world of creation. So the creation phenomenon associated and aligned with Yesh Me'ayin, Briya begins in Briya. So the Malchus Atzilus, which is the last of Atzilus, that is where this Ein Sof, associated with the deepest part of the Ein Sof, the Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that comes and, first of all, unites with the Kelim. Kelim are about containers, or bring about a certain finiteness in the air, if you will, because that's what a Keli is, right? You're pouring water, and there's no end, and there's a bunch of water falling in from all sides, and you put a Keli. What the Keli does, it limits. Now it's a container which contains a certain amount of water. Usually that's what people appreciate, to drink from a Keli, because we're finite, we're limited, and everything about the human being is limited, so I'd rather drink from a Keli than just, when it's all over the place, it's just non-satisfying. Well, of course I could find my, if someone's very thirsty, to do anything, but it's not truly satisfying, because satisfaction to the human being is when there's a Keli. Keli limits whatever's coming into the Keli. And here we're talking about the koyach of the finite, finitude, limitation. So this connects with the Kelim of the Esrei Atzilus. The Kelim of the Esrei Atzilus. Ivagar Moichad is what is underscored over here. Livre behen bal yodam bruim bali b'gvul. That through to create via the Kelim creations which are limited with the ultimate limitation, which means because Kelim is about Hagbala, as we understand it on every single level. So when this Ein Sof, which this is the koyach, which the Gashmias and Briya, Yesh Me'ayin, could ultimately come about, but the actual execution, the development of the implementation of it is when the koyach Ein Sof, Ives, in the 10 Kelim Atzilus, becomes one with the Kelim, which are about Gvul, even within Atzilus, yet it imparts the koyach of Ein Sof there, and therefore they could actually create. And what do they create? Of course, because it's Kelim, it creates the Bruim Balik B'V'Tachlis, creations which are completely limited, finite. Particularly, and this is within Kelim Atzilus, it's the Kelim, and namely, he says many times, he explained over here also, is the Malchus, because we know Malchus Kol Elamim. Where is the Ikir idea of Hagbalas and Malchus, even in comparison to all the other Midas? But here the Alter Rebbe says, for that matter, the Alter Rebbe in Shaykh Muni says anything north of Malchus, if you will, really doesn't have a Shaykhus, there's Manu Mokim, anything which is associated with Hagbalah, because there the Alter Rebbe speaks about the entirety of the Midas. Here the Alter Rebbe speaks about the Kelim, and Kelim is about Hagbalah. So in this itself can unite with the Kelim, so it produces Bruim Balik V'Tachlis, creations with which are finite, the ultimate expression of finitude. And particularly when they invest in Elam, in Biyah would be Bri Yitzir Asir, because here we're talking about the energy of the kelim themselves, even the way they're not silus. So particularly Deis Lapshus in the way they invest in Bia, here they perform more evidently in their creating Yesh Mi'ayin, the Nivra, the created, finite created being. However, it's known, Malchus, that seals, which we just indicated, that even though it ultimately comes from all the kelim, of all that it's as a sphere is, but the real idea, what produces Yesh Mi'ayin, is Malchuscha, Malchus Kol Ilamim. As we know it, the way the famous Pasach Eliyahu described in Kabbalah what the meaning of Malchus is, besides the fact that a Melech B'Layam, the whole idea of Melech is when there is a nation which are separated from the Melech, and he becomes a Melech over them. But even in the Keiches HaNefesh, as it says in Pasach Eliyahu, as an example, Machlas is Peh. We have in our intellectual faculties, our emotional faculties, and we have Machshava Dibra Maisa, thought, speech, and action. Speech is taking from the inside and sharing it with the outside, and that's the first crossover from one person's self to another party. I can intellectualize myself. When I'm for myself, by myself, actually it's even easier when there's no other party around me to properly intellectualize a kind of concept. Then there's emotions. It's, of course, emotions is usually for another party, but the other party is not yet part of this play out, part of this experience at all, for that matter. It's what's going on in my heart. I'm emoting for another party. But then I take that emotions, which usually got to come right away, and usually that really establishes that the emotions were real and authentic and so on. I tell the other party, I can't handle your pain. I can't handle your hunger. Come in, have a meal, have a warm meal. You may lodge here. Take this package home. You should be able to eat. How can I find you a job? I can help you with a job. How can I put you back on your feet? This is the emotions coming in and connecting with Mashava Dibra Maisa, thought, speech, and action, which action is the most important in cases where, I love you and I feel terrible for you, but short of doing something for the other party, no, you didn't really love the other person, you didn't really identify with the other person. Just simply because if you really, truly identify with the other person, of course it would follow with action. And speech and talk, but namely in this case, action is the most important to quench the thirst and the hunger, and to relieve the hunger, and to soothe the hunger of the other party. Of course, it has to follow with action. But how does it begin? Even how does the action come about? Through thought and speech. Speech is the time when what comes from the transition from the inside to the outer party. As long as I'm thinking, I'm intellectualizing, or even emoting, it's still within me. It's already dealing with another party, but yet I didn't talk to the other party yet. When I talk, it doesn't have to be a lot of space in between. It comes together, but it starts with an emotion. I identify my emotions, I identify the tsar, the pain of the other party, and then I go over and I talk to them. I reveal what's going on in my heart. So that's the crossover from what's going on inside to the outside. Recognizing the other party, overtly recognizing the other party, talking to them, giving them. There's the them out of myself. And everything else other than, and that is Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, Malchus Chamal's Kolam. That's why he says Malchus is Peh, because everything before Malchus, even though it's the Kelim, that's it was, but nonetheless it's still within who? Within Hashem. There's nothing out yet, nothing creating something out. Hashem is Ein Sof, Hashem is Bligvul, Hashem is infinite. So where does finite come into the space of Hashem? Yeah, eventually come out, and it's attributed to Kelim. It's like we just even said in this example. The reason I'm talking to the other person, giving the other person, is because I'm emoting for the other person. I'm feeling for the other person. So it comes from the inside, but that is still not yet actually dealing with the outside. And therefore, even the Kelim Datsilus, even though it's already something which is the source and the ability for the created beings, which starting from Bria would come to a fruition, to come to a realization, because it's already the Kelim, which is the Hagbala, which exists within all lesser spheres, where's the real Amun Mudah? It's known, the Ikeris Havos Hayesh V'Daber Nifrod, that is Kaviyachol out of the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm talking to another party. In this case, it's out of the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. course, we don't mean totally out of everything's within the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the way Hashem bidvar Hashem shamayim nasu, you look at a world, it's coming from the dibur of Hashem. Asar mamoris nibra. Hashem spoke creation to being, because creation is on the surface out of the demonstrable domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I say demonstrable because everything is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the way they wish to create it. Yesh mi'ayin. We spoke about this in the last few weeks. This is a program of Kaviyachal used by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, established by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Nivroim on their own should not protest that oneness of Hashem, even though everything about them is only because of Hashem. They don't have their own entity, but the way they express themselves is with Ani Avsiyah. Don't talk to me about a source. And again, we learned in a few areas in this very chapter. That's the nature. God alone. We don't have to explain that. Everything of Elam Haza does anything else than demonstrate the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have the mandate as a Yid to introduce the Emes Hashem La'olam through our learning Tanya and doing mitzvahs and Kol Masach L'Shem Shemayim, that introduce godliness in every part of our life, in every nukud, every crevice of our entire 24 hours. We introduce Elokus. We do it, the other party does it, and so the world will recognize the Emes Hashem, which has always been there, but it was been covered, and therefore the world on its own by default did not allow itself, or even have a thought kaviyachol, oh, I'm just a product of Hashem. No, the opposite is the expression of Elam Hazah by default is just the opposite of that, as we all know it. But we have the mandate, and we will succeed. The pasuk says, "Vayashem Melcha Kol Haaretz." It's not only on the base of Medrash, the Kailo, the Yeshiva. Kol Haaretz, Umola Haaretz. The entire land will be filled with the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it will be indicative that Einei Mavade is nothing else than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's not only through the mind of Am Yisrael or the appreciation of Am Yisrael that Rambam writes in the famous end of Mishnah Torah. The entire world will have just a little das Hashem. To know Hashem, of course, then Yidden will always have the edge over because they have a chelik of the kamim al mamish. But more, the Yid also will introduce that knowledge to spread it and be a the light upon the nation. But the whole world will be Hashem. The land will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. The entire Lam Hazeh Agashmi by Hashem Melcha Kol Haaretz. But what creates the scenario on the onset of something which is separate out of the domain of the environment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, if you may say so, is the Malchus, similar to when you talk to another party, then you're relating to the other party, you're formally relating to the other party. Till then, everything was inside of you. And that's why Malchus is peh. And therefore, the real idea of the Oisius, the real idea of, rather, the Nivroim, Mi'ayin Liyesh, comes and is associated with Malchus, even more than the Kalim Datzils, even though you have the Kalim idea, which Kalim is about a container, which is about Bali Gvul, which ultimately will be the source of creating Gvul, but nothing like Malchus. Because this is what the whole makeup of Malchus is. Malchus becomes Atik Lebria, the Bria, which means like the crown of Bria. And this is a Melech B'Le'am. The whole phenomenon of a king is when there's a nation, not children, not ministers. It's the nation established, the kingness of the king. As we know it evidently, king cannot be a king. You can't be a king over your children. You're a good father, but not a king. You can't be a king over royal ministers. No, that's part of the kingdom. That besides the people, there are people are closer. And again, just to execute the kingly relationship between the nation and the king. So of course there are ministers and different levels of ministers and so on and so forth, but you can't be a king, cut out the nation. You're not a king over ministers. So no people who are up there in the higher echelon of human beings, there's no phenomenon of king over them, and people who are close as family, there's no phenomenon of king. The king is ein melech b'lei am. It's the nation establishes that connection with king and a nation. The simple people, the average people, the masses, that is who the king becomes a king over. And again, this has nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. This is the way all the king is established based on a nation, ein melech b'lei am. Am is, again, they're not family members, they're not hierarchy, they are not on a higher level, again, on the ministership level. They're simple people. That's the idea of the crossover. The melech establishing that the connection with the simple meaning to say this which are on a different environment than who? The different environment, the melech, than the king, then royalty, then the royal palace, a different environment completely. And precisely the melech is a melech over an am. That tells you the Malchus establishes the am phenomenon, something which does not identify with the royalty and regality of the king, but that's who the king is a melech over. And therefore the real idea of nivroim, created beings, ultimately it's starting from bria and eventually leading to yitzira, to asiya gashmis. The leilam hazeh is the Malchus, because here you have the simple, this which are not aligned with the regality and royalty of, in this case would be Atzilus as an example. This is a different idea. A melech b'lei am, and therefore the real idea of the many nivroim are dafka from Malchus to Atzilus, even vis-a-vis the kelim of the other spheres. Another thing, just to add, he doesn't say it over here, so it's in other places. Am is meloshin gecholim oimemais. You have coals where the fire is very much burning in the coal. And then you have coals which are a little bit fire. You see the fire and you don't get close, even though it looks like sand, charcoal looks sandy, if you will, but you don't put your hand there because inside there's burning a fire. And then when the fire went out, in other words, the fire was extinguished, even there, in the beginning, of course, you don't put your hands, but there it's already less complicated, or less dangerous, if you will. Because the cholim were oimemais, they were already extinguished. The fire in them is extinguished. That's why an am, a nation, is called am. Because they don't appreciate it, they don't identify, they don't live the spirit of royalty, which is so inherent to the royal family, to the king himself. They are, which would again be synonymous with the idea of the fire burning. This is gecholim oimemais. It's extinguished. It's just the gecholim. That's what the average the amcha yid, or amcha. This we say amcha yid, but you say amcha. Amcha means the nation, includes everybody, the peasant, the average, the very average, because this is ultimately what establishes the phenomenon of a king. So Melech is Afghan Am, and Am is synonymous with the message of Nivroim. Nivroim, this which don't identify on their own that the uniqueness of Malchus, of Elokus, of the godly reality. So there are different levels, of course. Bria, it's already a big quantum leap step from Atzilus, and that what stands between Atzilus and Bria is, of course, the Malchus of Atzilus. So there's two dimensions, it says in Kabbalah and Chassidus. A Malchus, the way it's a Midah and Atzilus, and the way it has its effect. It becomes the size Rosh Nivroim. Actually, Lashon is Viraglo Yerdis Mavis, which is a very strong, stark expression. That its feet, which means the lower dimension of Malchus, comes down to Mavis. Mavis means death, but again, in comparison, Bria to Atzilus, of course, we could justify the word death because the Atzilus is a world all about Elokus, the total manifestation of Elokus. The idea of Hakbala begins in the Kelim Atzilus, but namely Malchus. Malchus becomes Malchus Kol Ilamim. Ein Melech B'lei Am. It's already a separate entity. These are the Nivroim which we're talking about. Until, again, there's different levels. El Bria, still Gan Eden Elyon, Elam Yitzira, Gan Eden Atachton, but there's already the big transition from Atzilus to Bria. But namely, as it comes to Elam Asiyah and Elam Asiyah Gashmi, Nivroim, which don't even identify Elokus at all. First of all, there is the mundanity, the hakshama, the physicality of this physical world, which on its own we don't see, and we can think of the Davar Gashmi and saying, Hashem is Einei Mavadei. Yeah, we look at a mitzvah, we look at a pair of tefillin, and you compare it to the way it was the hine on the animal, of course, it looks like, and it is a chefta shel mitzvah. And we know it carries. It's not only our knowledge and our imagination. There is something to it. It becomes a chetashal mitzvah. But when Mashiach comes, we will see the Kedusha in the physical. We'll connect that Emes Hashem, that matter, the Emes Hashem of Atzilus, all the way to every single area of the, but this is the Avodah of the Yid. It's not by default. To the contrary, by default, there's the quantum leap step from Atzilus to Bria through the Malchus, which becomes Malchus Chamas Kalam. The Yid does the Avodah in order to reveal the energy of Atzilus, which is the mandate of the Yid, to bring the Elokus, the regality, the royalty of Elokus, the royalty of Atzilus, the royalty of the king sends his son on a shlichus to bring to the far edge of his country where there's simple people, the simpleton, the ignoramus, and he says, talk to them, bring the spirit of who you are and where you come from to them. The Yid is a chelik of the kamim al mamish. We come from Atzilus. We have the ability to bring the spirit of royalty of Atzilus, of the Ein Sof itself, which is so manifest in Atzilus, la'olam, to the world. What level? Into the Erebriya Tzira Asiya, namely in Elam Asiya Gashmi, where we're ultimately sent. Neshama is sent to, where there's the complete Hakshama, where we're dealing with an Elam She'ein Tachlu Matimen, as we all know it, with a message which not only vaguely does identify with its source, with Elokus, but to the opposite. Aniva Afsiya, you see, look, and we mentioned this, we reference rather this page many times because it's so vital. This is one of the most telling prakim in the entire Sefer Tanya, which is Perek Lamed Vav in Lukuti Amorim. This is where the real ultimate goal is. Dafka Elam Hazeh Agashmi, She'ein Tachlu Matimen, a world that does not demonstrate the oneness of Hashem, and to the contrary, that's where the Yid ultimately brings that Emes Hashem La'olam, to the real core Olam. Also, as the Gemara says, Lashon Helen v'Hester, to the real concealment of the reality, because that's what the Yid's mandate, and the Yid could know that was given the mandate by a responsible God, to say the least. If you could chas v'shalom, we should even use that expression, but just to point out, Hashem would not tell a Yid to do something that they can't do. The Medrash says, the Gemara, of course we can do it. We therefore persist to stand. Do his avodah. Yes, it could look intimidating. Why isn't the world expressing its own emes? It doesn't have its own source. It's just Hashem created in a way that covers the emes from the reality and the texture of Elam Hazeh. It on its own has no other source. It's just constantly created. The whole Metzias, mention this again, we shouldn't take so much time. Every second Hashem is giving it life, not only like, as we gave the example, a device with a battery, but no, the device is still a separate entity. The battery makes it work, it makes it worthwhile. But because it brings function into the device. No, this is the whole mitzias, every particle of that stone, back to the stone, right? Every particle is Elokus, is Hashem giving it life and energy to exist and reviving it every second. So the stone should have screamed on its own name about it. But no, it's not. The contrary is, I'm a stone, talking about a shadish, which again has that similarity, as again we saw, to the highest levels of Elokus. We said last week, again, not to repeat. When Mashiach will come, the stone is going to demonstrate. Like it says, the Gemara says, the Mashiach will come, the Te'ena will scream, the fig will say, no, you can't bundle me, you can't take me massively. In other words, when it comes to the sabbatical year, yes, the owner of the field could also come in and take a fig and eat it. But when you want to assemble those figs like you do on the other 6 years, because the field belongs to you, it's and by the sabbatical year, you're not allowed to do that because everybody's equal in your field, yourself and everybody else. But if you'll try to demonstrate a certain authority over the field, it says the Te'ena will say, Shviz. This year is Shviz, the sabbatical year. It says the Te'ena itself will scream Shviz. And why not? That makes most sense. The Te'ena is that Te'ena, that fig is only the whole reason it exists in its entirety is because Hashem is giving it chayis. It's aligned with its creator. And the creator says today Shviz. Of course it should scream today Shviz. But that will happen when Mashiach will come, because that's our avodah, to be megala. Hashem gave us the mandate that I'm going to establish creation in a way that it will deny creator, and you have to introduce creator. You have to bring the royalty of Atzilus into the entire Bria Yitzir Asiyah B'nei Mazeh Agashmi. But the real crossover is from Atzilus, the way they just formed himself by himself, into Bria, creation, is holy and is lofty, and is divine. This is the spirit of Bria. At the end of the day, it is called Bria, creation, as opposed to Atzilus, which is the emanation, it is one with Hashem. So the real crossover, the real quantum leap step is from Atzilus to Bria through the Malchus, Emel B'Le'am. And yet Alter Rebbe writes another idea of Malchus, the way it's associated with the multiplicity, which this is where we find areas which are separate from Elam Atzilus. Elam Atzilus is all about a world of oneness. We just mentioned Hashem and His Eidos are one. Even Hashem and His Kelim are one. It's all about the oneness of Hashem. That's what Atzilus is. There's no multiplicity in Atzilus. For that matter, Hashem Elokim, even Hashem Elokim is because it's the source. Hashem Elokim is associated with Malchus. Again, you see it all comes together. It's the source of plurality. But where does plurality begin? Only in Elam Abriya. And how much more so in Maitzira and Asiya and here in Elam Hazak Gashmi. That's really where there is divisiveness and plurality and multiplicity. We have to introduce the Hashem Echad, the oneness of Hashem, in these areas which look so separate, with a separate entity, identity, and message. And we introduce the Achdus of Hashem. The commonality, even today, you see even sciences, Lahavdal, El Vavdal, is bringing out the commonality with different messages within creation, which on their own seems to be so distinct one of another, and they're starting to see that oneness and unity between them, commonality between them. And the reason is because in the end of the day, they're all part of Achdus Hashem. But the way that Hashem created it is with multiplicity and divisiveness and different levels and different ideas, even the four elements, the inanimate, the botanical, the animal life, the animal kingdom, the animal life, the world, and then the medaber, the talking human being, the human being, which would be the medaber. There's all four levels, very distinct. Everything in Elam is about multiple, and each species, there's no end of probably there is an end because it's Elam Hazak, but the multitude, which even the greatest scientists don't count. How many of this species exists in the entire world? They're getting a better idea, but they don't have even accurate knowledge of the reason, because there is the many, the message. This is everything. Is the message of this many is contradicting that oneness, and that's when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, we say there's the seven heavens. The Gemara says Ches, the numerical value of Ches is 8, and the Dalet is 4, and the Gemara that the Ches is the Zayin Kimanot. There's 7 heavens and earth. Oh, they have. Where's the oneness? And then you have 4 sides. 4 sides. Elam Atzilus, it's all one. Because it's about the oneness of Hashem. So what do we say is that the message, that's the message of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That the Aleph is the energy of the 7 heavens and earth and the 4 corners of the world. So it's all about the end of the oneness of Hashem. That's what we do when we say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He's our God with all the different parts within the human being. Not physical, but the different compartmentalizations which exist, and we say no. It's all about Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem is every part of me is Hashem. And of course, that lifts, sublimates a person. It's done with focus, and his mandate, and their outlook on, and that's what we follow. Not only Hashem Elokeinu, but Hashem Echad, the entire 7 worlds, and the 4 corners of the world, and the 7 heavens and the earth, with there's so much multiplicity, multitude, and no, it's all about Hashem Echad, the oneness of Hashem, and of course you come out of Krishna. That's Baruch Atah Hashem, everything's cleared up. You're standing face to face with Hashem. Different idea, and then you go out into the world. It's so much easier. That's why, by the way, davening is so crucial, so essential. In order for us to implement our mandate in Elam Hazeh, brings perspective and focus, is beyond crucial in order to be successful with our ultimate mandate. To establish this very physical world to be His delightful abode. So the Malchus has another idea He says, Vigam, we find this Malchus, which would be that energy which ultimately brings about this idea of Hakbala, limitation, finitude, and so on, is Ribu Anivraim Chalkuson, that the multitude of creations and their divisiveness, which were created, of course, that itself has to have an enormous kayach. Of course, that comes from the Ein Sof, which is Yochid Michu, with the ultimate oneness. That's why he could be the one who creates this multitude, multiplicity. Because that itself is a kayach. But how does it break down in reality to this divide and multiplicity? Is of course is the many letters which come from the Malchus, the word of Hashem, and the breath of Hashem's mouth, all of the army of Hashem, all the army of Hashem, all the army of Hashem, and again, this is something which was explained expansively in Shaykh B'Emunah. You see in the first chapter, again, it's a click away, the first chapter of the second segment, which is Shaykh B'Emunah. If you on the site Tanya, wherever you learn Tanya, or on the site TanyaLearn.com, on the site is Shaykh B'Emunah. The first, it's really identified, and all the classes are lined up, as we mentioned time and again, on the left side of the screen, and go down to the second segment, Shaykh B'Emunah. The first class deals with the multitude of Nivraim, called from the multitude of the Oisius of Hashem, the letters of Hashem, and again it comes out later also in the other chapters of Shaykh B'Emunah. As you can see it towards the end, as an example, speaks about the Oisius, and very briefly said, where is there, when it comes to emotions or anything that's going on within the person, as we explained before, through his intellect or his emoting experience, there's no Oisius, there's no letters, there's no words there. Where do words come to being? In thought, but namely in speech. For that I say thought because we think in certain languages. The thought process, there's already a structure of letters, of the 22 alphabet, the 22 letters. Again, the difference of one language and the other is the way we express those very same letters. Of course, the Lashon HaKodesh is distinct because that's where the emes of it is not just arbitrarily chosen one or the other. There's an intrinsic connection between the idea which is called with that name to the energy of it itself, what it contains, the energy it contains, thus the name it was given. It's not just, again, just by choice, just to be able to to be able to differentiate between the table and chair and tree and rock and so on. That's why it was given this name like all the other language. No, there's an intrinsic connection between the word eitz to the actual tree. Again, you can see it in Shaykh B'Emunah there, for that matter, the very first chapter. But the idea of Isi speak about later also. But what? So where do we find multitude in expression? In machshava, but namely in dibur, in speech. Because when the message is still within our hearts, and namely in our mind, there's no Isias, there's no letters there, there's no words in emotions. Letters and words begin in dibur, namely in dibur, machshava, but namely in dibur. Malchus is peh. And it goes together because the whole Malchus of a king is his dictates, his edicts, which he gives over, connects with the nation, and he gives over his words. The Anhog of the Melech, there's even a pasuk. The Anhog of the Melech has been with people. Then we understand it. Simply understand that's the connection of the Melech with his people. His words, what he gives over, his messages, his establishments, his edicts, his decrees. And so too the Melech, the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Malchus is peh, because Malchus is what creates the multitude of elements. And that is, in the end of the day, the Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, the spheres that seals is similar, right? There's the 7 midas, which are like the emotions. Well, the reason why we have these emotions, because we come from the 7, from Mishtal Shlomihem. That's why we have it. Many times we use an example to the message, even though the message is the reason for the example. The reason why the Adam was created with the 3 cognitive faculties and the 7 emotional faculties, because that's the way it's on high. We come from the on high. But we just give this an example because we relate to something which we see, and we identify. But we can see, so this is why we sometimes use this example for the message. In this case, by man, there's the 3 cognitive faculties, which is Choch Midas, and then there's the Midas, 6 Midas. But those six, and by those six, what do we do with the six midas? When a person, for example, the midah of compassion, which is rachmanis or chesed or kindness, leads to a person to, well, who's he wants to extend kindness to another party. He wants to extend compassion to another party. The heart feels the other party. So what does it usually lead to? Hi, can I talk to you for a moment? You look hungry. I see you're in pain. I want to alleviate that pain. If you're hungry, come, have a warm meal. So you put it into words. That is the Malchus, which follows the Midas. So the words, that's why the Pasuk uses Malchus is pet. And what do we find in pet, which we don't find in the areas pre-Malchus, prior to Malchus? Is the idea of Isis, letters. And letters are about multiplicity. So therefore, multiplicity is created via Malchus. And therefore, the real idea of Ishavos, Yeshua, Davar, Nifred, and Ibrahim is Malchus. And that's what he said. V'gam ribi an Ibrahim is Chalkuson, which were created is through the Ribuy Ha'Isis. We translated this. Is through the many letters which come from Malchus Pi Hashem. Over Ruach Piv, in the breath of Hashem's mouth, Kol Tzavavim is all the army on high, the army below, which means the sun, the moon, and all these stars and everything, which is the Tzva Ha'oretz, all come from the Pi of Hashem. Dvar Hashem Shemayim Nas. Ubruach Piv, Malchus is pet. So Nivroim, multiplicity, Nivroim, Bali Gvul, limited, but Nivroim is namely through Malchus. So he begins, yes, it starts with the Kelim, the Atzilus, which Kelim is Barak Bola, but he says, no, namely it's through Malchus, because Ein Melech B'lei Am, as we just explained, and also Malchus is Peh, which has all these different, namely the idea of Isis come from Malchus, which Isis are about multiplicity. Thus creates the Hagbala, the Yesh V'davar Nifrodim, Nifrodim, which again, where do you see the expression of the Yesh V'davar Nifrod? Its own identity, it's separate from something else, less carrying the message of the oneness of Hashem Echad. And this is the Ribuy HaNivroim, the Yesh V'davar Nifrodim L'Gaber begins in El Mabriya, which again, El Mabriya begins the process of Malchus Kolam, which is Malchus' Peh, starts creating again the separation from Bria, Yitzira Asiya, from Atzilus, again is via Malchus, because Malchus is where the source of multiplicity, through the Isis, the Malchus Peh, begin. Of course, Kaviyachal. And that's why it creates Malchus, Kol Ilamim. This is already worlds, Eilam Eloshim Helam Hester. And again, multiplicity, divisiveness, and so on, until we see it so evidently in Elam Hazakashmi. But that's where in Elam Hazakashmi we always have to remember. It's either the person can say, really, I'm the rock bottom, and this is where the most distant place in multiplicity and diversity, and what am I doing here? And no, remember, yeah, it's a challenge, but this is where Hashem wanted you to be Megala, the Hashem Echad. The Aleph, is Aleph Yishalaylam, is really the energy of the Ches and the Dalet and everything you see in front of you, which is the mandate of the Yid, to bring the Emes Hashem Li'elam through Limudat Torah and doing mitzvahs, and conducting himself in his 24 hours in alignment with the Ratzon Hashem.